a tax collector stands up from his booth, leaving Roman coins sitting on the wood. A fisherman drops his heavy nets into the salt water. Matthew sits down first in our Bibles, and he writes for the Jewish mind. He does not start with a virgin birth or a choir of angels. The Greek letters are unusually large. The tone is white-hot. He calls them foolish. He asks, who has bewitched them? This is the letter to the Galatians. False teachers have infiltrated the mountain churches of Asia Minor. They are demanding circumcision. They are enforcing strict ancient calendars. They are insisting that Gentile converts become culturally Jewish before they can be accepted by the Jewish God. Paul refuses to yield a single inch. He knows exactly what is at stake. Grace plus a checklist is not grace. It is a counterfeit. He rips their arguments apart. He defends the radical, terrifying freedom of the cross. The cross is enough, or it is nothing at all. Then the scenery changes. The dusty roads vanish. The open sky is gone. The air in Rome is damp. The stone floor is freezing. An iron chain scrapes against a Roman soldier's metal armor every time Paul shifts his weight. He is a prisoner. He is waiting for an imperial trial. The empire thinks they have silenced him. They think the walls will choke the movement out. They have only given him time to think. He writes anyway. He writes Ephesians. He pulls back the curtain on the unseen cosmos. He shows them that the blood of Jesus did not just save individual souls. It shattered ancient human hostilities. It tore down the dividing wall of hostility between Jew and Gentile, creating one brand new humanity out of the two. He starts with a genealogy. Adens, rhythmic list of names, stretching all the way back to Abraham. He writes Philippians. He writes to the church that funded his journeys, the church he loves. He tells them to rejoice. But this is not a shallow, circumstantial happiness. This is a defiant, bleeding joy. It is a joy that laughs in the face of chains and sings in the dark. He writes Colossians. He writes to a valley church he has never even visited. They are drowning in strange, mystical philosophies. They are worshiping angels. They are observing rigid dietary codes to reach a higher spiritual plane. Paul cuts through the philosophical fog. He points them to the absolute supremacy of Christ. Christ holds the spinning universe together. Christ took the legal record of their debt and drove a spike through it. 4 letters. 4 massive theological pillars. The Roman prison cell was not a tomb for the movement. It was a pressure cooker. It forced the theology onto parchment, preserving it so it could survive the centuries and cross the oceans. But then the camera zooms in. The wide-angle lens collapses. Paul stops addressing massive congregations. He writes to a wealthy boss about a runaway slave, and he writes to 2 young men about a world catching on fire. He presses the ink into the parchment with his own hand. The Greek letters are unusually large. He writes to a people who have been waiting in the dark for a king for 400 years. Matthew wants them to know the waiting is over. If you have ever stood beside a grave on a quiet afternoon, watching the heavy dirt cover someone you love, you are exactly who Paul was writing to in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. The new believers in that city were panicking. Jesus had promised to return and establish his kingdom, but the years were passing and their friends were dying first. They were terrified that death was a disqualification, that the grave meant they had missed the rescue. Paul writes directly into that blinding grief, telling them and telling you that the dead will actually rise first. Grief is not a lack of faith. It is the heavy tax we pay for living between the ancient promise and the final fulfillment. But then, the focus narrows. If you have ever been handed a responsibility that makes your hands shake, you need to read the letters to Timothy and Titus. Paul is no longer writing to massive, faceless crowds across the Mediterranean. He is writing to his spiritual sons. You can almost hear the raspy breathing of an aging prisoner who knows the executioner's sword is finally coming. He leaves Titus on the rugged, culturally bankrupt island of Crete, telling him to build order out of absolute chaos. Every page of his gospel drips with Old Testament prophecy. He uses the phrase that it might be fulfilled over and over again. He writes to Timothy, a young, easily intimidated leader, stationed in the massive, idol-worshipping hub of Ephesus, a city smelling of burnt meat and silver commerce. Paul tells you to guard the deposit. He tells you to fan the flame, even when your stomach is sick and the opposition is loud. These pastoral letters are not institutional manuals. They are the urgent last words of a father passing a heavy baton to the next generation, before his lungs give out. And then there is a single page of parchment that most people skip right over. If you have ever felt the sharp, bitter sting of betrayal by someone sitting at your own table, the letter to Philemon is written directly to your fractured relationship. Philemon is a wealthy man. He owns slaves. The invisible human engine that ran the entire Roman economy. One of those slaves, Onesimus, has stolen from him and vanished into the crowded, twisting slums of Rome. By every standard of Roman law, Philemon has the absolute right to whip him, brand his forehead with hot iron, or kill him, locking the events of Jesus' life to the ancient scrolls. He groups Jesus' teachings into 5 massive discourses, mirroring the 5 books of Moses. But Paul finds the runaway, and he sends him back. He does not send him back with a plea for mild punishment. He tells Philemon to welcome this runaway slave exactly as he would welcome the Apostle Paul himself. He tells a Roman master to look at his property and call him a brother. This tiny letter is not a polite request for ancient etiquette. It is a quiet demand to dismantle the brutal social hierarchy of the empire from the inside out. Paul's letters build the walls of the early church, defining how we live, how we lead, and how we forgive. But as the movement continues to expand outward, a massive theological problem begins to surface behind them. A problem that requires a bridge to connect this radical new grace back to the ancient blood soaking the temple altar. The letters of Paul reshape the Gentile world. They break the social structures. They build a new humanity. But a massive theological question remains. What do you do with the ancient blood? What do you do with thousands of years of Jewish law? The bronze altars, the thick incense, and the high priest entering the Holy of Holies? You cannot simply erase the history of Israel. The book of Hebrews steps into the gap. Matthew is the bridge. He anchors the terrifying new reality of the Messiah to the ancient, unshakable rock of Israel. We do not know who wrote it. We do not know exactly where it was sent. But we know exactly what it does. It takes the entire Old Testament system and runs it through the cross. Every shadow finds a substance. The blood of bulls and goats is not a permanent solution. It is a temporary covering. The human high priest dies. Jesus lives forever. The thick, heavy curtain in the temple is torn in half. Jesus is the new curtain. Hebrews is not a rejection of the ancient Jewish religion. It is the breathtaking realization that all of it was pointing to a single Friday in Jerusalem. Then comes James. He is the half-brother of Jesus. He grew up in the same house. He ate at the same wooden table. He does not write high theology about the cosmos. He writes about your hands. He writes about your tongue. He writes about how you treat the poor man walking into your gathering with dirt on his clothes. Paul tells the world that faith alone saves. James tells the world that faith without works is a corpse. A corpse cannot breathe. A corpse cannot love. A corpse cannot feed the hungry. James writes with the punchy, relentless rhythm of ancient wisdom literature. He compares the human tongue to a spark that sets a whole forest on fire. He warns that hoarded gold will rust and eat human flesh like fire. But then you turn the page to Mark, and the entire rhythm fractures. Mark is not a theologian. Mark is an adrenaline rush. You can almost feel the heat radiating off the parchment. Most people think James and Paul are fighting. They assume the New Testament is contradicting itself. But if you look closer, they are looking at the exact same coin from opposite sides. Paul fights the legalists who trust their own perfection. James fights the hypocrites who claim faith but hoard their wealth. James is not contradicting Paul's theology of grace. He is demanding the physical evidence that grace has actually arrived. Together, Hebrews and James form the Jewish bridge. They tie the explosive grace of the Gentile mission back to the ancient, calloused roots of Israel. They prove that God has not abandoned his original people. But the intellectual debates are about to be cut violently short. The skies over Rome are growing dark. The political wind is shifting, and the men who walked with Jesus are about to write their final words, while the empire lights the match. The smell of burning pitch and scorched flesh drifts through the humid night air of Rome. An emperor named Nero needs a scapegoat for a massive city fire. And the followers of the new Jewish king are an easy target. Peter, the fisherman, who once panicked and denied his Lord in the courtyard of a high priest. He is writing to Romans, likely under the shadow of imperial persecution. His audience does not care about Jewish genealogies, is now an old man facing down the deadliest empire on earth. He writes a letter to the believers, scattered like seeds across the harsh, rocky provinces of Asia Minor. He tells them the fiery trial is not an accident. The persecution is not a failure of the plan. It is a crucible. He tells them they are living stones, being built into a spiritual house, and that their suffering is refining their faith like liquid gold. But the pressure mounts. In his second letter, knowing his own execution by crucifixion is imminent, Peter addresses a new terror, the terrifying silence of the sky. The scoffers are laughing in the streets, asking why the promised king has not returned to fix the broken world. The delay is not a sign of divine apathy. It is the sheer, heartbreaking patience of a God waiting for the lost to come home. Then comes Jude. He is another half-brother of Jesus. He sits down to write a peaceful, comforting letter about common salvation, but he drops the thought. The house is on fire. Wolves have slipped into the gathering under the cover of darkness. He writes a brief, burning warning instead. He quotes ancient, strange apocalyptic texts. He summons the smoke of Sodom and the rebellion of angels. You can hear the urgency in his grammar. You can feel the desperation in his ink. He commands them to fight. He tells them to snatch their friends straight out of the flames. Temple rituals, or the fulfillment of ancient covenants. They understand one thing: power. So Mark strips away the long sermons. And finally, John, the mystic who wrote the fourth gospel, is now an ancient man, likely the last surviving apostle. He does not write about Roman lions or imperial swords. He writes about the invisible rot of false teaching. He writes his 3 letters in stark, absolute contrasts: light and dark, truth and lies, love and hate. You can almost see his frail, aging, hand trembling as he writes the 3 words that define the entire Christian reality: God is love. He tells them that if they claim to walk in the light but hate the brother sitting across the wooden table, they are still suffocating in the dark. The empire is trying to kill them from the outside. The false teachers are trying to rot them from the inside. These final letters are not theological essays written in a quiet library. They are survival manuals written in a burning building. The apostles have all spoken. The foundation is laid. The letters are sealed and circulating through the underground networks of the ancient world. But the library is missing its final volume, and the story cannot end until the sky splits open one last time. The final book of the New Testament is arguably the most misunderstood document in human history. Most people read it as a crystal ball. They assume it is a terrifying puzzle box of multi-headed dragons, blood-red moons, and demonic locusts, meant to decode modern political events. He cuts the parables down to the bone. What he leaves on the page is raw, kinetic force, and predict the exact date of the end of the world. But this obsession with the future completely misses what the text is actually doing in the present. To understand it, you have to look at the very first verse. The Apostle John is exiled on the rocky, wind-battered prison island of Patmos. He is staring out at the Aegean Sea, listening the saltwater crash against the sharp stones, when he writes the opening line: the revelation of Jesus Christ. The English translation uses the word revelation, but the Greek word John uses is the noun apocalypsis. In the modern world, apocalypse means the end of the world. It conjures images of nuclear ash, cinematic destruction, and global doom. But in the first century Greek, it meant something entirely different. The root of the word simply means to uncover. or to pull back a heavy curtain. It was the word used for the moment. A newly carved marble statue was finally unveiled in a public square. It is the exact same word Paul uses in Romans chapter 8, when he writes that all of creation is groaning, waiting eagerly for the apocalypsis, the revealing of the children of God. That root changes everything about how you read this final book. John is not writing a chronological timeline of modern warfare. He is pulling back the invisible curtain that separates the spiritual realm from the physical world. He is showing the suffering, terrified first-century believers of Galilee and turns around. A Greek doctor in a Gentile city dips his pen into black ink. He uses the Greek word euthes, meaning immediately, over 40 times. Jesus is baptized. Immediately, the Spirit drives him into the wilderness. That the Roman Empire is not the beast that actually controls history. The apocalypse is not a prediction of the end of the world. It is the unveiling of the reality that is already here. When you read Revelation as an apocalypsis, the terrifying imagery starts to make profound sense. The dragons and the beasts rising from the sea are not meant to frighten the believers. They are subversive, highly coded political cartoons. They are ancient, sensory imagery designed to show that the corrupt empires of the earth, built on violence and the blood of the martyrs, are already defeated. The slain lamb is already sitting on the throne. The Gospels announce the arrival of the King. The Book of Acts recorded the explosion of his kingdom. The letters built the architecture of how his citizens must live under the pressure of a hostile empire. And now, Revelation pulls back the cosmic curtain to show how the story ultimately resolves. This is why the New Testament ends exactly where it does. The library does not close with a set of institutional rules, or a dry doctrinal statement, or a historical appendix. It closes with a garden city coming down from the sky, wiping the tears from human eyes. And when you step back and look at all 27 books together, a pattern emerges that changes how you read every single page. He calls his disciples. Immediately, they leave their nets. He touches a sick woman. Immediately, the fever vanishes. Matthew traced the ancient Jewish bloodlines and anchored a terrifying new reality to the unshakable rock of Israel. Mark stripped away the heavy theology and revealed a rescue mission moving at the speed of a Roman chariot. John stared into the dark matter of the universe and proved the creator of the cosmos had walked in the dirt. A violent wind ripped through an upper room, and an assembly of citizens was called out to subvert the empire with love. Paul pressed a reed pen into parchment from a freezing prison cell and shattered the ancient dividing wall between Jew and Gentile. James demanded the physical evidence of grace and tied the theology of heaven back to the calloused hands of the poor. An exiled mystic pulled back the heavy curtain of human history and showed a suffering church that the slain lamb was already sitting on the throne. 27 documents, one living breath. But maybe the part that stays with me most is not the cosmic visions or the massive theological pillars. It is a single, quiet page sent to a man named Philemon. It is the image of Paul, an old man whose lungs are giving out in a damp Roman. You can hear the dust kicking up from sandals moving at breakneck speed. You can hear the crack of the Roman whip. Prison, taking the time to track down a runaway slave in the twisting slums of the capital, and sending him back to a wealthy master with a quiet demand to look at his property and call him a brother. The New Testament is not a pristine, sanitized theological textbook dropped from heaven. It was forged in the fire of real human fracture, in the grit of actual betrayal, on the freezing stone floors where men had to decide if the resurrection was actually real. If you are in a season where reading this book feels like staring at a dead, historical manual of impossible rules, you need to remember how this library was actually built. It does not ask you for a perfect, unbroken performance. It invites you to step into the mess, the persecution, and the chaos, and trust the architect. And may the God who breathed his spirit through fishermen, physicians, and prisoners meet you in your own quiet rooms and pull back the heavy curtain to show you the King who is already there. If this opens something in you, subscribe, leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is struggling, and the roar of a demoniac in the tombs. Jesus is constantly moving, constantly working, constantly pressing toward the cross. To read their New Testament right now. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. Mark's Gospel is not a biography. It is a rescue mission. Two accounts of the exact same life, one rooted in ancient promises, the other moving at the speed of a Roman chariot. But as this movement spreads, beyond the borders of Judea and out into the Gentile world, the narrative requires something else. It requires a careful historian to verify the claims. And it requires a mystic to show us the cosmic weight of the blood that was spilled. A Greek physician sits at a wooden table, unrolling scrolls of parchment and sorting through personal letters. He is conducting interviews. He is tracking down eyewitnesses, perhaps speaking to an aging mother who still remembers the smell of stable hay and the rough wool of shepherds' cloaks. A political prisoner sitting on a rock in the Aegean Sea watches the sky tear open. 27 separate documents. His name is Luke, and he writes for The Outsider. If Matthew builds a bridge to the Jewish past, and Mark sprints through the Roman present, Luke widens the camera lens to capture the whole world. He emphasizes the women, the lepers, the poor, and the marginalized. He writes with the precise, deliberate vocabulary of a medical mind, making sure that a Gentile official named Theophilus has an exact, verified account of the events. But before we look at the fourth and final account, we have to understand what Luke, Mark, and Matthew were actually doing. We have to look at the title the ancient world gave to these documents. You find it in the very first line of Mark's text, the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ. The English translation is gospel, but the Greek word is euangelion. In the first century Greco-Roman world, this was not a religious word. It was a piece of imperial propaganda. When a Roman general conquered a new territory, or when a new Caesar was born, heralds would run through the stone streets of the cities, shouting the euangelion, the good news. It meant a new ruler had taken the throne. It meant the global order had shifted. An ancient stone carving called the Priene inscription uses this exact word to announce the birth of Caesar Augustus, calling him a savior. 27 letters, histories, and visions written across 5 decades, in underground prisons and imperial palaces, on sinking ships and dusty Roman roads, who would bring peace to the earth. So, when these writers take this specific imperial word and apply it to a crucified Jewish rabbi, it is an act of treason. The Evangelion is not a private spiritual offering. It is a public declaration of a rival king. And no one understood the cosmic weight of that king better than John, writing decades later. John is the mystic. He is an old man, likely the last surviving apostle. Writing from the city of Ephesus, he does not start his account in a Bethlehem manger, or with a list of ancestors. He starts in the dark matter of the universe. In the beginning was the Word. John's text is heavy with sensory details. He wants you to taste the sharp, fermented wine at the wedding in Cana. He wants you to feel the gritty mud pressed into a blind man's eyes. He wants you to smell the burial spices in the damp air of an empty tomb. Roughly 90% of the material John put on the page exists only in his account. He is not trying to give you a chronological timeline. He is trying to produce a supernatural shift inside of you. He organizes his entire book around 7 miracles and 7 statements, proving that the God who spoke the cosmos into existence. Most people assume the New Testament is a single book. They view it as a seamless manual handed down from heaven, bound in black leather, had put on human flesh, and walked in the dirt. 4 accounts, 4 angles, 1 unified declaration that the world has a new ruler. But a king requires a kingdom, and a message requires messengers. Once the reality of the resurrection settled on a small room of Jewish disciples, the story could no longer be contained in Jerusalem. And what happens next alters the map of the Roman Empire forever. 50 days after the Passover, blood dries on the wood. A sudden, violent wind rips through an upper room in Jerusalem. It does not just rattle the wooden shutters. It lands on human heads like tongues of flame. Men who were cowering behind locked doors suddenly spill out into the stone streets. They speak, and Parthians hear them. They speak, and Medes hear them. They speak, and Arabians hear them in their own native tongues. The Spirit of God is no longer locked inside a stone temple behind a heavy curtain. It has made a home inside human ribs. This is the Book of Acts. It is the second half of Luke's historical project, and it reads less like a document and more like a fire spreading uncontrollably through dry brush. The narrative pacing is relentless, with gold-tipped pages, meant to be read cover to cover like a novel. But if you look closer at how these texts were actually born, Stephen is crushed under heavy stones, and the movement scatters. Saul is blinded by a blinding light on the dusty road to Damascus, and the great persecutor becomes the great pioneer. Peter stands on a coastal rooftop, smelling the salty air of Joppa, and realizes the Jewish God is suddenly inviting the Gentiles to the dinner table. Prison doors are shaken off their iron hinges in the middle of the night. Shipwrecks tear timber apart in the dark waters of the Mediterranean. But the mission survives. By the end of Acts chapter 2, thousands are joining this movement. Verse 47 says that the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved, and the English translation calls this new gathering the church. But the word Luke uses in the Greek is ecclesia. It is a compound word. The prefix ek means out of, and the root kaleo means to call. In the ancient Greek cities, an ecclesia was not a religious gathering. It was a political assembly. It was a group of citizens called out from their private homes into the public square to make governing decisions for the city. It was the governing body of a free people. When these early believers adopted this specific word, they were sending a shockwave through the Roman system. You start to see something the single book reading completely misses. The New Testament is not a manuscript. It is an explosion. They were claiming that they were the true citizens of a new kingdom, governed by a different king. The church is not a religious club trying to escape the world. It is a political assembly called out to subvert the world through sacrificial love. And this assembly begins to move. It moves from Jerusalem to Judea, up to Antioch, across the turquoise waters, and straight into the marble heart of Rome itself. But as the fire spreads, it encounters violent friction. New believers in pagan cities do not know how to live this out. They fight, they fracture, they fold under pressure. The explosive growth requires more than just miracles. It requires an architect to lay down the theological steel and concrete. And the man God chooses for the job is the very man who once tried to burn the whole thing to the ground. When you move past the book of Acts, you hit a solid wall of letters. These are not private diaries. They are the theological architecture of the Christian faith, written primarily by a former Pharisee named Paul. And he begins his masterwork with the book of Romans. Romans is the longest, most carefully constructed letter in the New Testament. Paul is writing to a church he did not plant. The question is not just what these books say, but why they are arranged in the exact order they are. To feel the weight of this library, in the capital city of the empire, preparing them for a visit, he wants to ensure they understand the exact mechanics of what Jesus accomplished on the cross. And everything he builds rests on a single, controversial verse in chapter 1. Romans chapter 1, verse 17. Paul writes that in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed. The English translation uses a religious word, but the word Paul uses is the Greek dikaiosine. In the ancient world, dikaiosine was a legal term. It appears in secular Greek courtrooms and philosophy, stemming from the root dike, which means justice or custom. It was the standard of conduct expected by a judge. If you stood before a magistrate and your actions aligned with the law, you possessed dikaiosine. But Paul takes this rigid courtroom term and completely subverts it. He argues that because human beings are fundamentally broken, no one can achieve this legal standing on their own. The judge himself has to step down from the bench, take the penalty, and hand his own perfect record to the defendant. That route changes everything about how you read Paul. Righteousness is not a standard you achieve. It is a status you receive. If seeing these ancient words, subvert modern assumptions, is stirring something inside of you, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. You have to watch it being built in real time. Starting with the men who decided to write down the ghost story that refused to die. So Paul takes this pristine theological framework and watches it collide with the chaos of actual human beings. You turn the page from Romans to 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and the theology hits the gritty, sensory reality of a pagan port city. Corinth is a metropolis of wealth, idol worship, and absolute moral decay. You can almost smell the stench of the meat markets, mixing with the incense burned, to marble statues of Aphrodite. The church there is fracturing. They are suing each other in public courts, sleeping with their stepmothers, and getting drunk at the communion table. 1 Corinthians is not a polite letter of encouragement. It is a rescue operation for a church actively tearing itself apart. Paul spends both letters to the Corinthians, pulling them back to the center, reminding them that the cross of Christ is not just a ticket to heaven. It is the blueprint for how a community is supposed to live. He teaches them a cruciform life, where power is found in weakness, and wealth is found in giving it away. But Corinth was just a city dealing with moral compromise. What Paul writes next is to a region dealing with a hijacked gospel. He picks up a reed pen. He does not wait for a scribe. He presses the ink into the parchment with his own hand.